Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing.
Okay, ready?
Welcome to Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
optimal
wellness
brought to you by
Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, I want to talk about my pink keyboard and mouse.
How are you enjoying that, by the way?
It's amazing how much joy it's bringing me on a daily basis, and I'm slowly color coordinating everything else. I have my pink notebook. We got gel pens on the run.
I guess for listeners, Jazz just got a pink keyboard and a pink mouse. What to help with your productivity? I guess a little.
Certainly, it helps ergonomically for the wrist.
Having an external keyboard is going to help you type faster and edit faster.
Yeah. It's something I wanted, but it was an expense that you weren't sure was going to be beneficial in the company's overall success or my health or wellness, really.
But it brings you joy.
Yeah, which then in turn does improve my wellness.
It's an expense that helps your workplace wellness and by extension helps you be a better employee.
Which then helps the company do better. There are a lot of other ways that companies can be doing this and in the long term, improving the productivity and the health and wellness of their employees.
I think we learned a lot about that during the pandemic.
I mean, in the pandemic, employers were great at getting the jumpstart on masks, giving their employees steady access to hand sanitizers. You know, everyone took another look at their sick day policy. Those were new ways that companies have got on board in terms of caring for their employees' health and wellness. So now that we're moving past the pandemic, moving into an endemic, workplace health and wellness is staying top of mind for employers.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jazz. We're the producers of Eat, Move, Think.
And in this episode, we're talking about workplace wellness.
That's right. Medcan's medical advisory services team works with some of the country's biggest companies to make sure that they're doing everything they can to care for those employees.
In this episode, you'll hear Dr. Peter Nord, Dr. Aisha Khatib, Dr. Alain Sotto, and Dr. Matthew Burnstein share stories about some of the most memorable programs they've implemented for workplace wellness. And you'll hear about the real difference those programs made in the lives of their clients.
And they're guided by Mark Bairstow. He's Medcan's program manager of employer health.
Here's Mark Bairstow.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Bairstow. I'm honored today to share the floor with our team of chief medical advisors. First, we have Medcan's very own chief medical officer and leader of the medical advisory services team, Dr. Peter Nord. Welcome, Dr. Nord.
Great to be here.
And then next, we have Dr. Alain Sotto. He is currently the chief medical officer of the Toronto Transit Commission as well. So welcome, Dr. Sotto.
Thank you.
So we also have Dr. Aisha Khatib on our medical advisory services team. She's also Medcan's clinical director of travel medicine.
Thank you so much, Mark.
And finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Matthew Burnstein. Welcome, Dr. Burnstein.
Good afternoon.
Many of the participants in today's webinar may have come to this webinar from our Workplace Health and Wellness Strategy Playbook. In that playbook, we go through the Workplace Health and Wellness Improvement Cycle. When we were developing this cycle, we really took into consideration that this can be used in addressing any of the major chronic disease states that we talked about previously. But really, it's an approach that can be used across all of those different health issues. It starts, first and foremost, assessing what is the current state of your employees' population health, as well as matching that up to what is your organization currently doing from a benefits, a programming, a policy standpoint. Once we have that baseline understanding, we can then move to planning and governance. And that's really establishing a plan for the next 12 months based on that assessment. And that includes communications planning. It includes planning out the dedicated resources that are needed, as well as establishing the right governance and leadership structure to support delivering and executing that plan. That follows into the last two phases, which is execution, which includes programs and services, policies and protocols, as well as benefits and even environmental supports that you can put in place to support your employees as they achieve their best health. Finally, the last phase of the cycle, which connects to the first, is monitoring and evaluating. And we'll talk about this later in the conversation, how important it is to monitor and understand the ROI of what your programming is delivering so that it can justify more and more programming in the future. And so that's our workplace health and wellness improvement cycle. In terms of an agenda, we're going to start from hearing from Dr. Khatib about her experience with mental health screening during her time at Kiwi Rail. But before we do that, I want to set the scene for you a little bit, taking a little step back. We all know that over the last few years, there's been a real spotlight on mental health. Luckily, that picture has been getting brighter and brighter recently, and the MASS team has certainly noticed that as well. Businesses are getting better at addressing wellness in the workplace and understanding the nuances of their individual employee needs and the collective needs of their employees when it comes to their health. In Canada, particularly, there has been a focus on mental health more than ever right now. As we know, mental health is considered a chronic disease just like cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and musculoskeletal conditions. And what we see here is that there's really a top 5 most common disease states that we should all be focusing on when we're talking about health planning and health and wellness programming. And that's really going to be the focus of our conversation for today.
Hey everyone, Jazz here. I just wanted to let you know that this section of the episode contains mentions of suicide. If you'd like to skip it, you can jump ahead to the 15-minute mark.
So, to start things off, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Aisha Khatib, and she's going to walk us through her story of her time at Kiwi Rail developing mental health screening programming.
Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me, and welcome everybody to this very important webinar to discuss some key components of health and wellness for your employees in the corporate world. So the work I did back in New Zealand with Kiwi Rail was that I was part of a third-party assessor as an occupational doctor and travel doctor for Kiwi Rail. So we used to do yearly or 6-monthly medical assessments that would comprise everything from chronic health conditions to mental health screening for all the employees that were part of the Kiwi Rail Corporation. So one of the things that was flagged in a lot of these screenings, and we would use different scales for screening for depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions, was that there was a lot of trauma and there was a lot of post-traumatic stress that was potentially associated with different positions in the Kiwi Rail employment hierarchy. Particularly, one of the areas was with the conductors. And unfortunately, as we do see in places like Toronto, the trains are a method that unfortunately a lot of people do use for suicide. And you can imagine, as a train conductor riding trains across the country, the witness to some of these traumatic events can be something that stays with you for a very long time and can cause a lot of trauma and mental health issues down the road. So this was one thing that we definitely saw in the conductors, where it wasn't necessarily brought up at the time of the event or even close to, but usually was picked up in screening. And when you kind of question further, sometimes it was actually brought back to these workplace related incidents that, again, you can imagine, from anything by conducting a train to being the people on the tracks going to clear the tracks and cleaning up the tracks and ensuring that they're safe for the trains to continue, how traumatic of an event that would be for the employees. One of the things that developed out of this was the importance to regularly screen all employees for mental health. And one of the things that was being implemented then was to have a regular and routine screening for these types of diseases like depression and anxiety and other potential mental health issues that could arise and that could affect workplace functioning. One of the things that we notice, and you can imagine a lot of the Kiwi Rail workers are, big macho guys. It's not something that a lot of people like to talk about or even admit that they may have an issue in regards to mental health. There still is a lot of stigma around mental health illness, and a lot of people feel that if they talk about it or they need to seek help in regards to it, it's considered a weakness. So one of the programs that we did was to implement screening and assessment for everybody so that you take off some of the stigma away from it. And if there were any things that were being flagged, then these employees were being given additional support measures to help cope with some of the things that they were dealing with. So whether that was being put in place with a counselor or a psychotherapist, or if needed, a psychiatrist, those were being implemented in a timely way through the screening methods, which are very universal and are used in primary care, all around the world. And the lack of support or coping mechanisms and the lack of potential, discussion in regards to how to deal with some of these stressors. It is getting better now, and there is more talk about it now, but it's still something that, again, there's a lot of stigma around and considered to be a weakness. If your other peers are coping, why am I not coping? Why can I not deal with these types of things? It really comes down, especially to a lot of these personalities in some of these different types of fields. And it really is translatable to a lot of high functioning employees in different corporations and different companies as well. So one of the things that a lot of the medical schools did was implement, again, the idea of regular mandatory mental health check-ins required for everybody. And it was like a 10 to 15 minute check-in with a counselor or the dean or somebody that was trusted that would do the screening and just have a chat and discussion. And in those situations, people who were struggling, people who had some mental illness or other issues were being brought to light. And in that way, it was being able to support these people and put in place the supports and safety measures around them for them to be able to continue their work and continue their training and functioning. This is something that I think is a really great tool to consider in a lot of companies and employees across the board. And I think, again, mental health is one of these things that there still is a lot of stigma with. A lot of people, worry about their ability to function in the workplace and what other people will kind of think of them if they feel that they are going through some of these weaknesses, even though it is so common and so many people deal with things like depression and anxiety and grief and other traumatic issues throughout their lifetime at some point. And it really comes down to establishing, first of all, recognition of it, and then creating the supports and safeties around them so that they can get the help and support they need to continue being able to function. So having these regular mandatory check-ins at workplaces and for employees, you can see the benefit that would provide with being able to screen within the employees any of these issues, and then again be very proactive and early intervention to help support them to maybe establish whether they need more counseling or more time or potential treatment options, giving them basically the opportunity and the network for them to approach different health professionals as required.
Thank you, Dr. Khatib. Yeah, I think you hit on each of the points there and went into a great amount of depth.
The other thing is it risks their work, right? Like their ability to work.
Right.
Because if something is recognized that something's wrong, they're going to be pulled off.
Yeah, and that's what they're worried about.
So even if there is an issue, sometimes they don't even tell you because they don't want to lose work. And that goes along with not just the stigma, but the fear of having it affect their ability to make money and their survival, essentially. So the nice thing about these screening tools is it uses other indicators. Somebody who comes in saying they're struggling may not talk about the actual issue or may not actually express the true vulnerability, but other parts of the scale may be assessing things like their sleep disturbances or their irritability or their ability to focus that also potentially may point to a problem. And it's basically taken as a whole to then pick up what is causing a lot of these issues that may be manifesting as their condition.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Khatib. And I couldn't agree more. I think that story really sticks with me because, there is still a stigma of mental health in the workplace. And this seems like a very useful way to try to break down that and detect different issues early and quickly. Dr. Noor, if you also want to maybe comment and provide some commentary too.
Yeah, here's a stat. 5 out of 5 people during their lifetime are going to have some mental health challenges. I think all of us at some point in our lives are going to have a mental health challenge. It's inescapable. And as we look at the stressors that have come along with the pandemic, we've got lots of studies out there. A third of all workers said their mental health has been declining over the past year. That's fairly recent. And as many as 80% or more of employees, just generally in other surveys, have said they've experienced a mental health challenge over this last 2-year period. So it's ubiquitous. We got used to talking about waves of COVID, and those were physical waves, impact on healthcare system, hospital admissions, death rates, all the waves that have run through all of our societies. And that thankfully is now waning beautifully. But what we're going to see is the increasing wave of mental health challenges as over the next number of years. The ripple effects are going to be over a very long period of time. And that's all age groups, whether you're a child, teenager, youth, seniors, all different demographics are going to be experiencing this. And even sort of a PTSD echo effect as well. It could be very easy to get triggered. If you think you're kind of through a challenge, then all of a sudden there could be a trigger that brings it back to home again. And if you think about Kiwi Rail, if they have just over 4,000 employees, if you think 80% of them had some challenges, that's 3,000 people that over the last year have had some real challenges. So this is a big problem, and unfortunately, even though COVID isn't in the media as much as it was before, this is something that behooves all of us in all of our organizations to continue to pay attention, because the worst is maybe yet to come in this area.
Which is all the more reason why it should be a main focus for our employers and corporations that can, have a big impact on their own employee populations. Maybe Dr. Burnstein, if you want to briefly talk a little bit about the mental health education research that you conducted or were a part of.
Okay. First of all, I do have to say mental health, while it's only maybe the second most common cause of claims, longest duration, psychiatric disease are chronic recurring disease. You don't have just one gallbladder attack or one heart attack. Once you've got an episode of depression, you've got a 50% chance of having a second episode. And if you have a second episode, you've got a 75% chance of having a third episode. Psychiatric illnesses start in early life and recur over your entire working career. Getting a great handle on them or being supportive of individuals with psychiatric conditions is incredibly important. And an employee's relationship with their manager is perhaps the most important relationship in an organization. And having managers who are comfortable dealing with mental health issues is critically important, and it's difficult to do. No manager has a difficulty talking to an employee who comes into work limping and going, "What's going on?" And managers and other people as well have great difficulty walking up to someone who's crying or looking sad and saying, what's going on? Can I help? Do you want to talk about it? So we recognized at Bell Alliance, which is Bell Canada and Atlantic Canada and all of rural Ontario and Quebec, that we had a problem with mental health claims. They were number one cost. So we developed an association with the CN Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, which is a gem of an organization within the St. Mary's University complex, and it is headed by Dr. Kevin Kellaway. He's a Canadian Research Chair in Industrial Psychology. He gave us one of his graduate students, Dr. Jennifer Dimoff, for a year to run a research project. And what Dr. Dimoff did in association with our team is developed a mental health awareness training program. And we gave it to about 50 supervisors and then compared them to other supervisors over the next year who did not take the training and looked at the mental health claims for both groups and the duration of the absences. Interestingly, the number of claims didn't actually go down. However, the duration of the absences for mental health claims were cut dramatically by about 30 or 40% in the next year. Also, in the study, we looked at managers' comfort in approaching employees, and their comfort level improved by 25 to 30%, also a significant improvement. And I'd also say that the number of grievances we received from the union for disability decisions, because we were self-insured for a year at 100% of income, went to zero in the last couple of years following this program. because they came to see us as we're here to help, not here to harm or deny anybody. It was an accept and assist model as opposed to a deny and defend. We knew we had these people for the next 30 or 40 years. They were committed to us, so we were going to be committed to them.
So now what we'll do is we'll pass it over to Dr. Alain Sotto, who's going to talk to us about his time at OPG and TTC implementing the cancer screening program and how that helped many employees detect a cancer risk.
Thank you, Mark. It's always nice to speak about health and wellness programming because that's the fun part of health and wellness. So I'm happy to chat with you about it. And at the end of the day, at OPG, we had 13,000 employees, and TTC, we realized that there was a huge issue with cancer deaths, not just in our population, but in the general population. We know that the number one cause of death in Canada, and I stress Canada, and you'll understand why, is cancer. And number two is heart disease. 28% of Canadians die of cancer, and heart disease is about 20%. The reason I say Canada is because in the United States, it's reverse. We realized that the number two cancer killer is colon cancer, and it's 95% preventable. And the top 4 or 5 are lung cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer. They account for over 50% of all cancers. We knew that we had to do something for prevention. Our population demographics are getting older, and they're not able to get the proactive screenings that they should be getting necessarily. And what I mean by that is when you go in to see a family physician, you have an average of about 7.2 minutes to discuss not only your acute problems, but also think about prevention, vaccines, and what else can we do for screening. So we knew that there was a hidden gap here to understand how can we fill in the gap as far as the workplace to promote cancer screening. I went to my boss at the time at OPG and I said, I want to launch this colon cancer screening program in the workplace. And then her eyes turned red and said, colon cancer? Who's thinking about colon cancer? And I said, well, it's the number two cancer killer and it's 95% preventable and we need to do it. And she said, well, what's the ROI? I said, the ROI is going to be one life. If we save one life, we've paid for the program. And I partnered with stakeholders as far as screening colonoscopy and facilitating the delivery of the definitive test. We targeted employees 50 and over. And what we did is we launched an education campaign. And then we also made it a mandatory part of the health and safety meetings. And employees would come participate in 4 health and safety meetings per year. And this is one of the health and safety meetings was about colon cancer prevention, and it was very well received. We also gave every employee a colon cancer referral form for colonoscopy that they could take to their family doctor and then have filled out. We made it very easy for them. At the end of the day, we knew that we were going to save lives because, patients don't know they have colon cancer until they're bleeding or until they're losing weight for unknown reasons. And it's really a silent killer until it's really presenting itself in a late stage. So we said, okay, we're going to do the education. We invited the Ontario Cancer Care Vice President, Dr. Linda Rabinick, to come and speak to us. We had very important thought leaders. And certainly, I did a lot of the fill-in as far as education. We use the 4 E's of health and wellness programming. So you got to educate your employees. You need to engage them in a conversation about taking ownership for their own health. And then you empower them with information on what is important. Knowledge is power. And then the most important E, as I call it, is enabling. And that's where Medcan really exceeds, is enabling employees to get the right screening program at the right time and make sure it's customized for their purpose. So we did that, and I can tell you that having done it for OPG and TTC, that we've done a great service. We've saved many lives. I remember getting many emails saying, I went to your talk and had no symptoms. I went to my doctor. He referred me for colonoscopy on your form. And sure enough, I have an early tumor in my bowel, booked for surgery in a few days. And thank God for your program at OPG and TTC. I'm now going to be treated early and hopefully cured. That email resounded several times, several hundred times. The other thing we did at TTC is because we have unique challenges to get people off the line, so to speak, and then put them in a town hall meeting sort of situation. So we know you can't take a bus operator and put them in a town hall. It's not going to work. So what I devised is I filmed an 11.1 minute video that we sent attached to everyone's paycheck with a referral form that went to 13,000 employees. And we had the same resounding success. So it can be done. And it's really, really important because if you can prevent a colon cancer in your workplace, which is the number 2 cancer killer, you have not only saved a life, but you have saved huge amounts of STD costs, LTD costs, and the new drugs for cancer are usually using biologic drugs, which can cost up to $70,000 a year for each person who develops cancer. So I think it's really, really important to have this. And we know from recent Sanofi surveys that 90% of Canadians believe their employer has a role to play in cancer prevention. And that was from a large study done in Canada. So this is Canadian based. That being said, we also found that diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and obesity were a huge factor for us. So at TTC, for instance, we did a diabetic screening program, biometrics on site. You spend 15 minutes with a registered nurse. They do a pinprick blood sugar, A1C, HDL cholesterol, and total cholesterol, and blood pressure, waist circumference. And then at the end, you can get a cardiovascular report card that you can take to your doctor for follow-up. Of the 1,000 employees that we did in 1 week, we found that 20% of those employees who had no idea that they were diabetic or pre-diabetic, and they went to see their doctor and had a confirmatory test to prove that, yes, they were at high risk for diabetes and they had to mitigate and prevent the diabetes illness, hopefully with conservative measures and or medication. So that was the raison d'etre. If you use the ROI of one life, that's important, but C-suites are usually relate to business sense and financials. So you have to make it palatable in their speak because they have to justify the cost, not tremendous cost, but justify the cost. And I always went to my C-suite supervisors and managers and told them, listen, this is important. Think of this health strategy as part of your safety strategy because you can't truly be safe at work without being healthy first. And that's a paradigm shift that they understood very well. You know, it's a home run when you do it. And I think it's terribly important that employers fill in the gaps. Even though that we have a publicly funded healthcare system, we know that right now the healthcare system is strained. We need to fill in the gaps. And that's where the employer has a captive audience to understand the needs of the company, understand the needs of the organization and the employees. Thank you so much.
Completely agree, Dr. Sotto. Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, if it's a program that can save lives and prevent those kind of outcomes, you know, that in itself is going to justify this programming for sure.
Absolutely.
Dr. Noor, did you want to maybe share any of your experience or commentary on that story?
Yeah, I think Dr. Sotto's last comments are really poignant in that with a healthcare system in crisis, employers have an increasing obligation, if not actual, and certainly not from a regulatory perspective, but potentially as your employees are thinking about it. And so, you know, the obligation for forward-thinking organizations in terms of their employee health are really coming to the fore at a time when our health system literally just can't be counted on to do the work that it was doing before. You know, if we look at breast cancer, 1 in 8 Canadian women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. That's a pretty horrific stat. And obviously finding cancers earlier means a longer, healthier life as we can get treatment started earlier. And so that's the goal. Unfortunately, again, our health system is mostly reactive and not proactive. And clearly, by finding things earlier, it's better for people. It's also better for the healthcare system because we actually save money. It's an ounce of prevention and a pound of cure. And more than that, we also have direct and indirect savings to the employer as well, for employers that get involved with these sort of programs. I mean, the problem with breast cancer is that over the last 2 years, we've had over 400,000 mammograms that weren't done in Ontario. Massive challenge. The healthcare system was just redirected all around all the issues having to do with the pandemic, with COVID-19. And so we're going to be paying the price over the next number of years for the lack of preventative care that the system's been able to offer, again, over this last couple of years. So we're going to be watching this very, very closely. And as employers, again, I think your employees might be looking to you to help in that regard.
Agreed. I think employers have increasingly more of an opportunity to help impact the lives of their employees. So now let's move on to our final presenter, Dr. Matthew Burnstein. We'd love to hear from you and your experience with Hershey's chocolate and musculoskeletal injury prevention and ergonomic assessments.
Thank you very much. I had the opportunity some years ago to serve as the medical director of Hershey's Chocolate at their Moyers plant in Dartmouth, which produced the world-famous pot of gold. It was a great job. You could eat as much as you wanted while you were there. I became obese, as did all of my staff at my home office. But if you can imagine the factory, it's about 1,000 employees, several lines of people working for 8 hours a day, placing chocolates in boxes moving along a conveyor belt. The individual needs to grab the chocolate, orient the chocolate properly, and put it in its appropriate slot. 26 boxes a minute. So you've got about 2 seconds to find the chocolate and rotate and put it into position. Needless to say, our employees were suffering from a lot of musculoskeletal issues, shoulders, arm, wrists, lots of carpal tunnel surgeries. Workers' comp claims were through the roof. Experience rating had our fees significantly higher than similar industries. And productivity was down, and replacement workers who were brought in were never quite at the same speed. And so while they traditionally had a disability management program addressing individuals on a case-by-case basis, no one had actually thought to go back and look at a root cause analysis. So we brought in an occupational therapist to help us with that. And many of you would be familiar with physiotherapists and have probably been to physiotherapists. But occupational therapists specialize in what occupies our time, maximizing our ability to do things. So they start by doing what's called a job demands analysis and then provide recommendations on way to alter that. The belt, which is moving along at a steady pace, is at a standard height. Well, we had workers who were 4'11" and workers who were 6'6". The ergonomics were off. So easy solution, get platforms for people of various heights to stand on with protective along the side so they don't fall off, so that they're at a more appropriate height. Rotate positions. Can you imagine standing for 8 hours a day doing this exact same motion? So we got people to move along the line, and so half the day they do this, and half the day they do this. Developed arm slings for workers. Imagine sitting at a desk all day long without arm rests. So what the OT did was brought in this device that hung along the ceiling, brought your arms, so your arms were free floating as you moved. And finally, the OT did a great job in educating and engaging the engineering team because the rows of the lines were constantly being refashioned depending on whether we were doing Box of Gold 28 or we were doing Hershey's Kisses or Halloween or Valentine boxes. To say, when you're designing the equipment, think about the human factor. Think about the person who's going to be standing there. It was a real cultural shift for them, and they became really engaged as engineers often do in problem solving. Also, some very simple things. Put in soundproofing along the lines. Made sure the wheels were well greased so it's quieter. Improve the lighting and change the fluorescence to ones that were more natural light. Making it more comfortable for the workers to talk to one another while they were working. And the outcome was happier employees. Our injury rates went down acutely. Our experience rating came down. It takes 2 or 3 years based on the experience rating system to bring us back into our group. good relationship with union and team leads who were part of the program, and a cultural shift among the engineering team to think about the human factor in the designing equipment. And in fact, on a go-forward basis, all the procurement people would come to human resources or health and wellness and say, we're thinking about buying this piece of equipment. This is how it's going to work. What do you guys think? And then we'd go to the health and safety team and say, we're bringing in this new piece of equipment. What do you guys think? You're going to be working with it, which really improved the whole culture of the organization. So it was a great experience, and I've lost most of the weight, but it was a great job.
Kept the learnings, but lost the physical learnings, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Burnstein. Any kind of commentary from Dr. Nord, if you want to jump in?
Yeah, chronic pain is such an issue. In medicine, we have vital signs. You hear that, and we think about 4 vital signs: temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate. And we talked about pain being the 5th vital sign, that literally we need to be asking all of our patients about pain because it's so ubiquitous. And literally 20% of Canadians are suffering from pain on a daily basis. It's an amazing stat, something we should all pay attention to. And clearly, much of this pain is either hard tissue or soft tissue. So hard tissue, bones and joints, soft tissue, muscles and tendons. And so, the experience of looking at repetitive strain injuries, like at Hershey's, it can be extrapolated to many, many different industries. And so we need to be very sensitive to the pain issues that we might be experiencing. It could be in an office setting, doesn't have to be in a manufacturing setting. Ergonomics, the way the monitors are set, something as simple as that. And because we're doing repeated activities over and over again, small changes can have big payoffs. It's estimated that the direct and indirect cost of chronic pain in Canada is about 38 billion. So even making a small dent into that it's good for people, it's good for employees, and it's also good for businesses.
Couldn't agree more. So overall, the key takeaways, I think, from our session today is 1, using the workplace health improvement cycle to continue to build impactful programs is our core recommendation. Overall, mental health screenings and check-ins remove stigma and are effective to screen and identify issues. You cannot have a safe workplace if you don't first have a healthy workplace, as Dr. Sotto pointed correctly out. Reviewing the human musculoskeletal impact of new equipment and the mental health impact of new policies and procedures is paramount. And the cost of employee health programs is often recovered through the reduction in health benefit spending, through reduction in nutrition and absenteeism. And overall, our team here at Medcan, our medical advisory services team, and our employer health programs team is here to help you as you grow your employee health and wellness program. Thank you to all of our mass physicians here today for sharing those wonderful stories, and I think very impactful stories, timely, and I think a lot of our clients can really learn from those experiences. So thank you for sharing them.
Thank you, Mark.
Anytime. And we've also left a link to download our playbook, our strategy playbook, which goes into much more detail on the different phases of the health and wellness improvement cycle. So be sure to head there to download that. It also includes Dr. Sotto's 4 E's that he went through, his core elements of employee wellness programming. We covered some really great topics and really broad range of topics too. So thank you very much to our mass physicians for joining us, and thank you for joining our webinar.
Thank you to Mark and Jesse for putting it all together. Thank you, everyone.
Not a problem.
Good job.
Thank you. Bye.
That was Medcan's Medical Advisory Services team, including Mark Bairstow, Program Manager of Employer Health, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Peter Nord, Director of Travel Medicine Dr. Aisha Khatib, Dr. Alain Sotto, and Dr. Matthew Burnstein.
To learn more about how Medcan's Medical Advisory Services team could take your business's health and wellness programs to the next level, you can email mas@medcan.com.
We'll post episode highlights and links you can visit on our website, eatmovethinkpodcast.com, and follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at MedcanLiveWell.
Say hello and tell us what your favorite story was in this episode by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau, and that includes...
Hey, I'm Jasmine Ratch. I'm the managing producer.
I'm executive producer Christopher Scholgen, and then social media and strategy support is from...
It's from Chantel Gertin, Andrew Imex, and Emily Bozick.
And we'll be back soon with a new episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
See you soon. This podcast episode is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with any specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.